Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to House General and Housing. It is still Thursday, March 20th, 2025. We are briefly going to hear a proposed amendment, H1, H461, an act relating to expanding employee access to unpaid leave. We had a walkthrough of the amendment by Ledge Council earlier today, but we have the pleasure of having Representative Donahue here with us, who is the proponent of the amendment. So what I think we'll do is ask Representative Donahue to explain the amendment and then bring it to the committee for discussion and straw poll. Representative Donahue, welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the committee hearing this. I am Representative Ann Donahue. And since you've had a walkthrough, maybe I'll quickly review the language, but really go to the rationale. And I just want to point out that the language would be adding an exemption to holding a job open for someone. And it does require clear and convincing evidence demonstrated by the employer, as well as mimicking the language from the unique services exemption by requiring it to show that it was the only option to prevent substantial and grievous economic injury to the employer's operations. So this is not an easy lift to be able to use an exemption. So I want to start just by saying I really support what this bill is trying to do. I think the ability to take needed leave time and protect the return to your job, which is the core of it, is a very fundamental concept. I think expanding it to all of the people who don't fit in an old established category, but they are legitimately impacted from the event, and expanding some of the circumstances that fit within those important legitimate events. But I do think that clearly, the expansion of those will mean there will be, by its very nature, expanded requests to take that kind of lead. And so I am concerned about the potential impact in limited cases, but these potential impact of that expansion. We know that our small businesses around the state, and I know this is not for under 10, but nonetheless, it's still small businesses, are having tremendous struggles around staffing. In Northfield, one of my towns, there are 2 small businesses that repeatedly have closed down hours, sometimes mid-afternoon, things like that, because they can't find a staff for it. And one of those 2 is now going out of business for inability to keep enough hours open. So I think adding to the burden of having to hold a job empty if they are unable to find someone to hire because, it's going to be for a 2-month leave period and there are not enough people interested. We have enough trouble with people interested in taking jobs, but given the fact that it would be a limited amount of time, it could really make it impossible to make it unable to find someone to fill that position. And so I think that if the inability, an inability that's shown by clear and convincing evidence, and that's the only option to prevent this kind of substantial and grievous damage to the company, we need to make that exception. I think it would be used extremely limited basis. I think with an expanded number of eligible people, there would be even the risk of it, 2 at the same time, things like that. And I think we need that relief valve, given the expansion of the bill.
Questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate your support for the measures that we put in with inclusive language. As well as additional for folks like myself and who have bereavement and domestic violence. I think one of the things about this bill is it does open up reflection on what we currently have, which is this. So our changes are the ones that we had mentioned. I did want to point to the fact that we did have testimony from business community that did not have concerns with, this is currently what we have and have been having, and come on in. And, so I did want to point to the business community. I do understand the workforce challenges of today. I live in South Burlington. We have many businesses. I talked to them about, their concern of what they're dealing with is the lack of housing, right? And that they can't find folks to fill jobs. So, I feel we did work on this bill and have some testimony to kind of, there were some other things that were in a different bill that was proposed that was even more expansive. And so I feel like we, as a committee, and with advocates, really found a sweet spot of support of why it was important to me as the lead sponsor to find the business community to be supportive, because but I do understand your concerns, and perhaps that might be something that in another, in January might go something that you introduced to look at that. But for me, I'm comfortable with the place that we've landed based on the testimony from those folks, and that we really tailored it down. But I appreciate your support, though, as well, for the inclusive language and the expansion.
Thank you.
The proponent of the amendment doesn't have a lot of time.
I was about to,
I was gonna say,
Oh, sorry.
please, we're gonna have time, all of us, that's okay. We're gonna have time, all of us, to express our thoughts and opinions. So what I'd like to limit right now, before she gets castigated by the chair of the committee, to questions of the proponent. Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you for, I'm trying to be quick, bringing this. I think we all sit here and are really supportive of our businesses. I want to bring up sorry, I'm looking at the amendment right now. And my question for you is that how would an employer prove that the individuals that they're talking to are looking to hire are not willing to take a job? The reason I bring this up is that USCIS, so they work with granting visas for those who are coming over temporarily. There's like very strict rules that they have to follow to ensure that like you are hiring for a job. I just went through the visa process. They're hiring for a job that they cannot find anywhere in the state of Vermont. They cannot find it anywhere in the US. This amendment doesn't really go into the details on how an employer would prove that candidates that they're talking to are unwilling to take a limited time basis job. Have you thought about that?
yes, I mean, the standard, the degree of proof and how they would be required to do it is sort of, established law in a sense, and the standard is clear and convincing evidence. So whatever they would present as their evidence would have to be clear and convincing in terms of proof that in fact they were unable to find someone willing.
Any other questions before we express our various opinions? Yes.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing this amendment. However, how does this affect, I know it affects an employer if their key employee is not at work. How does this affect, let's say, a woman who has a baby, and let's say there's complications or whatever, or God forbid, somebody gets hit by a bus and they're hospitalized for a long time. They are also losing out because we don't have paid family leave other than state employees. How does that affect them, and what do you suggest for them?
You're absolutely correct. And, the purpose of this law is to protect those people. And I recognize that. I think that this kind of situation would be would be really limited. And, you know, I would suspect, I mean, first of all, I think it would be rarely invoked unless it was really, you know, substantial and grievous injury to the operations. But the other piece is, I think in real life, it might result in, you know, conversation with the employee where, you know, I just can't survive without you for 3 months because I haven't been able to find anyone, and maybe compromising on the length of the leave, or that kind of thing. I almost thought of, and I thought it might complicate things, I almost thought of making it also contingent, if, you know, a contingency, if the leave will exceed 1 month. And, you know, so that you could never invoke this, because I think it would be hard to prove anyway, clear and convincing a grievous damage if it was a relatively short amount of time. So that's the concept. You're right. I mean, that is the
And
challenge.
I would like to add that a woman doesn't get pregnant by herself. And that there are companies that will only hire men because they know men can't get pregnant.
And their response to unpaid leave would be a part of that, you know, and then I'd have to give you leave, so I'm not gonna.
And
Yeah.
yanked out of here. So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I
Thank you.
suspected that would happen. I really appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time, and I apologize
very
for
much.
this dual tasking.
No, of course.
we're at that time of year. Okay. Discussion, and then we'll do a straw poll.
If you know of any of those companies, you should report them because that's highly illegal.
I'm sorry?
That's illegal to do. You should report that.
Yeah. That's discrimination.
Oh,
definitely.
If you know the company, you should report them.
A lot more common 40 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've come a long way, but not far enough. But
I am inclined to support the amendment. You know, if it's actually, you know, if it's actionable, it sounds like it is. From the perspective of small employer, if you cannot find somebody to be, and I understand demonstrating that you can't. But if it's a matter of keeping the shop open, there are other people's jobs at risk, not just the one person.
Yeah, I understand. We haven't taken testimony on this amendment. This would, which is, if that's, you know, your suggestion that you would like to take intense testimony on an amendment right now. But I will not be supporting the amendment. And I want to, you know, make it obvious again that we are not changing anything that is currently here. We are just making inclusive language. So while some folks might find this as an opportunity to go back in and change what we currently have,
I see. Okay.
that's fine.
So 2 is existing law. In other words,
Yes.
yeah, it's all
Once
existing. law.
again, this is existing law. We are not changing anything, but I do understand that while this bill is open, it causes other concerns, which you have expressed in committee. And I welcome if folks would like to work on a bill themselves in January that would repeal things in the bill, then that is their choice. But to come in now, you know, at the 11th hour with this without any testimony and to change a law that we have in existence, because her objections aren't to what we put in it. Clearly, she stated that her objections were something else with the existing law. It wasn't the domestic violence, the bereavement. Well, we have that attached because we have to show everything that's in there. So there are folks, I'm sure, in the building that don't like our existing unpaid leave. So that's where I will not be supporting it.
Did you have your hand up, Madame?
I definitely can speak, but if I can wait until others are done.
Well, I think your experience, I know you have experience in HR. I think people would like to hear what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo what Rep. Krasnow had said, that this would be a change to current law when what we're doing really isn't a change to the law, but it's a change to the definitions. I am absolutely sympathetic to employers, especially small employers. I have never worked for a large employer and I have always been the employer. And I have the lovely responsibility of handling all leaves for my my business. And it can get really complicated. I'm concerned that not only would this make things more complicated, I think it would be harder for employers to kind of manage. We have, in the state of Vermont, we have some really great temp agencies. Like there are a lot of different ways to hire employers. I don't know if the chair wants to touch on this. He had brought it up and I didn't catch it. I thought it was great that currently the law is the employee performed unique services and hiring a permanent replacement during the leave after giving reasonable notice to the employee intent to do so is the only alternative. That "and" is a lot, it's a small word, but it says a lot, where this just would say the employer was unable to find an employee willing to take the position on a time-limited basis. I think right now, understanding the workforce, people want a full-time job. I absolutely understand that. I'm incredibly sympathetic to it. But I also know of a situation where I have had an employer complaining to me that they can't find anybody. And when I've worked with said manager, I said, okay, here's all your information. How many candidates have you reached out to? You have 109, and I was told none. So I have a hard time.
Well, if there's somebody who's not in compliance. certainly.
Absolutely. I'm also concerned that that word "and" isn't in here. So it's expanding the ability to use this. And I just have concerns about,
So as the bill is introduced, you feel that that situation is already adequately covered?
I would say yes.
Okay.
And that's my humble opinion.
Well, I humbly need to hire an HR person.
Maybe what I'll do is I want to second what she's saying, but try to explain my reason. It's a combination of these.
Oh.
I think, actually, this was not obvious to me in first reading. I couldn't figure out what Anne was trying to do because I thought at first it just her new 3 duplicated 2. What I think is important about 2, the exception, is it really applies, it doesn't apply to everybody. It applies to people who are performing a unique service. They're really doing something that's unique. And I guess the implication being it's harder to replace somebody who's doing a unique service because, I don't know, let's say they are spreadsheets whizzes and they run the economics of the company. And then they go, you figure, well, then the universe of people I can hire is smaller because it's a unique service. So what she was getting at is the existing 2 says, 1, this exception only applies to people who really are doing something very special. And then you have to show real hardship to the firm also. And I get that. Anne's amendment doesn't follow that pattern. It has nothing about somebody being, the unique service thing is just gone. It's just not there. And I guess my feeling is, first of all, if it were there, it wouldn't be necessary to do this because it's in 2. In other words, 2 is written so that if someone was performing a unique service and it would really hurt the company, you could hire somebody else temporarily, permanently. It would take care of Anne's problem. But what Anne has done, and inadvertently, I don't know, she's taken this unique service thing out. And I guess my feeling is I kind of agree with you. I kind of feel like before I would do that, actually wade into the substance of this act and hold. We'd have to have testimony that it was really, I wouldn't just do it out of my own head because, oh gee, that's a problem. I don't know. So I would want, so I don't feel that I could support this amendment. Yeah,
And as we're talking and I'm listening, I've realized that the testimony we've taken and like the conversations we've had are all centered around 12-week leave. But let's take, just because I did it recently, let's take a birth. And short-term disability is a little bit different, but I'm going to use the same numbers. So if I have a vaginal birth as the mother or the individual who's giving birth, short-term disability or this leave, the doctor will say, I need 6 to 8 weeks. If I have a C-section, it then could go up higher for recoup. So hypothetically, I can meet with my doctor. The doctor's filling out and says, you know what? I think you actually only need, let's just say 3 weeks. And that sounds great. Don't look at me, Mary. This is fake math. It's fake math, but let's make it easy math for me, please. But let's say a doctor's like, you get 3 weeks. I think you'll be back. You'll be fine. Maybe it's not a baby. You break your leg or something. You're not going to be able to find somebody who's willing to work for 3 weeks. But that leave would be covered. So under Ann's, I feel very confidently the employer could say, nope, I can't find anybody for 3 weeks. Sorry. And then I think also Anne made a comment where she's like, maybe you can negotiate leave. We shouldn't ever be negotiating leave. I would say to any of my employers that you are walking into a discrimination case. I think like as HR, that's a really scary thought. And again, my lens is how my philosophy and how I approach HR and employment issues. I know that's everyone's a little bit different. But I have some major concerns on the other side of, okay, so what happens if you do let that employee go? Are you opening your business up for litigation? And granted, when you work with employees and other people, there's always a risk. I just feel like there's more risk in this stipulation than there currently is now. So all that being said, I will not be voting in favor of this amendment. But I actually am really sick and like leave policy and would be more than willing to looking at our current policies. Because I think there are some things that we could do differently that are both good for the employee and the employer.
Mary?
I would first like to thank you, Representative Bartley, for your explanation and your experience in HR. I also worked in HR
Perfect. So
for a number of years. And I also was a small employer. We owned a little grocery store and an insurance business. I can't imagine an employer that hires a person to work and they have the specialty job and doesn't ever think about what would happen if, God forbid, something happened to that employee, or, they're out on long-term disability or whatever. I would think a good employer would either know the job himself or herself, or have somebody as backup. So I am definitely not in support of this amendment.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I agree with you. It's not the employee's fault that the employer hasn't managed the company so that there's the loss of one person can tank the company's economic outlook, or whatever you want to call it.
Any other comments before we take a straw poll? I will say, I cannot miss it. Oh, go ahead.
just to be clear, carpenters are not specialties, but they are scarce.
Yeah,
And when you have a contract deadline to meet, and you need 6 people on site to put a frame up for a 2-week window, 5 is dangerous. And if there's nobody interested in a part-time temporary job, that's a contract problem. Now, yes, I can do everything in my shop, but I can't do it all at once. I cannot be in the heavy equipment and on the frame at the same time. So it's more difficult than that. It isn't, you don't always have the resources that you need to pivot in a moment. And you don't always, and I can only speak to construction, that you don't always have the ability to pivot. And if you keep removing the ability to do so, and I would not want to replace any of my crew. But if I have an $85,000 frame put up, and I don't get it up in time, I have 4 other crew members that are going to be out of a job.
It sounds like a very risky proposition to even have that. I mean, that's the thing. It's a small business and also, huh?
there's a line behind.
There are, I mean, I'm just saying, there are situations where it's just not as easy as, oh, you're a bad manager and you don't care about your employees. That is not the case. There are other situations where you do, and you're responsible for taking care of the whole crew, including the one.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
And then you-
with all due respect, I completely understand what you're saying, but if someone is sick or injured or taking care of a loved one, they're not there anyway, and you don't want them working, so,
No,
and
that's not.
and this isn't about-
I can't find them.
but that's not what this bill is about, actually.
Yes, I'm just
This bill-
restating.
Right, and we can have those conversations in the next biennium if you'd like to introduce a bill to go after that. But it's important to me that people who are of different identity than a man and a woman get the same access. And that's what this bill is about to me. It's about
Right.
equality for everyone. And it's about the fact that if someone is a victim of domestic violence, or if someone lost a parent or loved one, that they don't have to be there. It's not about the merits of if you can find someone to work, because this is what it's about. It's about equalizing the playing field for every member of society. But I'm happy to talk about another bill if you'd like, that does go into the merits of the law. But it's not the time, I don't think, to debate the current law.
Okay. We
We haven't.
hear you. Yes, go ahead.
I absolutely hear your concern, and I think the best person who could have just walked in the door did, because I believe with reading the language as it currently is, not the amendment, unique services isn't necessarily somebody who's certified or it could be a CFO. Like, let's just use a CFO. There are thousands and thousands of CFOs out there. A CFO could be a unique service to your company. So if you do have a carpenter
Okay,
who is, incredibly scarce, my reading and my understanding of the law and how it's practiced is a carpenter could be considered a unique service
okay.
to your business, especially depending on the size of your business, because say you only have one carpenter, that carpenter is going to be unique to your business.
It's,
And that was my that's a decent read. Yes, please. And then, I'm not debating, I'm just hoping to give some sort of this is what the law is, this is my understanding, and hope that it
You're
helps.
hired.
Oh, I love that.
I'm not, by the way, just so you know, I do not hear you as saying that you're either, at this point, having heard her, I'm hearing you say, I have a concern about this whole thing.
Separate from this bill.
Yeah, this bill, I don't hear you
Yeah.
debating this bill. So you're understood there.
Okay.
Sophie, the question to you, I guess, is, could there be a circumstance, before you walked in the door, there was a hypothetical, which isn't so hypothetical, of, someone who's got a career, got a crew that includes 6 carpenters and they're doing framing on a job that has to be done quickly. And one of the carpenters takes a leave. Do you think that an argument can be made that that fits under 2? Because the carpenters are providing unique service, they're essential to the job. They're unique in this situation. Is that a fair question? Fair restatement of your question?
Yes.
I think that, I mean, all I can do is look at the language that's currently in the law. So the employer would have to demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that a person provides unique services, and that hiring a permanent replacement, is going to cause, that's the only alternative to prevent substantial and grievous economic injury to the employer's operation. So it's a pretty stiff burden that an employer is going to have to overcome if they're going to replace that person.
It's, I think it's 2 comments that I would make. First of all, I think one of the difficult things about this area of law is that almost every protection to employees can damage in some way an employer. And I'm sure the debate, can you imagine the debate around a 5-day week? Or an 8-hour day, every one of these things carries, and the decision was made from a kind of ideological perspective. Well, we're going to protect employees, and the economy adjusts. And I think the question is, what's the right balance? But I personally agree that I don't think I'm not going to support the amendment because I don't think now is the time to make that decision. And I'm very happy we are where we are and that we have laws, because in 1980, when I started my law firm, we had, in 1981, by then in 82, we had 3 employees and we were about to hire a 4th, and she called me up and said, well, I don't know if you want to hire me, I'm pregnant. There was no law, there was no protection. And I said, well, sure. So I asked my 2 partners what I should do. And they said, are you crazy? Can't hire a woman who's pregnant. And I said, this isn't for now. This is a career decision. We're going to hire someone for a career. What the hell difference does it make if she's pregnant in the long run? Well, when I, after 16 years, stopped being managing partner, she was managing partner from then until just a year ago. And I'm really glad that I made that decision. But at any rate, I think, yes, Mary, and then I'm going to ask for a straw poll.
Does she hire pregnant women?
So the next day I found out that another one, we had 3 women with her and 3 men. And I found out the next day, you guys are going to give me. The next day I found out that one of the other women was pregnant. That's 2. So I went to the 3rd woman and I'm the managing partner.
Just to make sure.
I said, Letty,
Years ago.
please tell me, you don't have any plans to have another kid, do you? And she says,
It is.
yeah, I know.
All right.
No, it's not correct anymore. I know that. And she says to me, well, I do get pregnant very easily. And I said, okay. And guess what? She did. It was 3 pregnancies at the same time, and we survived just fine.
First of all, I'd like to say kudos to you for hiring the first person. I'm not sure about your most recent comments, but with all due respect, for example, carpenter, you sign a contract with someone. You might want to say, with everything working well, this house will be finished by a certain date. You also, if you're building a house, you have to consider the weather.
I do.
I mean, there are days when you can't. I have had 2 houses built and they have never,
Oh, no, they're never.
they never have complied with the finished date ever.
But some general contractors will hold you to a calendar and there are penalties money penalties if you hold up the next contractor and the next contract, the next sub and the next sub and the next sub. So and just, you know, from my perspective, what I would wind up is I'd wind up with 7 employees, try to figure out how to make it work. This is what I would do, being me. But even that.
And just the other thing to flag in the bill, I mean, again, you have to be a covered employer, so you have to have 10 employees or 15 employees, depending on the week, and they have to work for at least a year. For you, they have to have worked 30 hours a week to be a covered employee. So, yeah.
I move to find the amendment unfavorable.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay, so what that means, everybody, I'm gonna ask for a show of hands because it's historical. If you vote, if I'm gonna say how many are in favor of the motion. If you are in favor of the motion, you are unfavorable on the amendment, okay? So let me put it this way. How many people are in favor of the emotion, which means they are unfavorable on the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9. Okay, so it's the vote, the straw poll is
902.
2. 1, 2. 902. Thank you. If you would like to we are now, we are reconvening. Wait, I have not said the A word yet. I've learned I can't do that. Thursday. Okay, at this point, we are for the day adjourned.